Welcome to my channel. My name is Man the Wall. I talk about history, politics, and whatever else I feel like that day. And after putting out 2 music-related videos that none of you actually watched, I decided to go back to what started this channel in the first place, shitting on tankies. Truly one of life's great joys. Specifically, I want to talk about the Uyghur situation in China, something that really is a long time coming. Out of all the terrible tanky talking points I intend to dissect and debunk, this one might be the absolute worst. Namely because, unlike a lot of tanky talking points, it's in relation to an atrocity that is taking place as we speak, and not merely historical revisionism in regards to an atrocity long ago. This was ramped up and amplified when John Oliver did his episode on the Uyghur crisis, which reignited discussion in relation to this topic once again. Specifically, the video I'm going to talk about is by a YouTube ML who calls himself BayArea 415. He's made multiple videos defending China's modern-day system of ruthlessly authoritarian state capitalism, I mean socialism with Chinese characteristics, that I may go into again someday. But for now, we have this video, where he supposedly debunks John Oliver's segment. Let's see how he does. Since I'm starting at the 2-minute mark, I figure I should quickly tell you what happens beforehand. Basically, he claims that John Oliver's show repeats Western imperialist talking points, and that criticisms of John Oliver's show are being censored because one episode of The Empire Files got age restricted. I'm not going to talk about this part. I'm here to debunk his claims about the Uyghur situation, not to simp for Oliver.
Now, why am I taking the time to debunk this video? We all know that liberals will peddle this kind of Western propaganda. There are actually way too many Western so-called leftists that are falling for this propaganda as well. As we know, the Western left has a chip on its shoulder when it comes to China, but this is the WMD lie of our time. This is what invades countries, and leftists really need to be more skeptical about this.
So, where to begin? First of all, I've heard this comparison of the Uyghur cultural genocide with weapons of mass destruction myth in the build-up to the Iraq War, and it's really stupid and a bad faith argument for multiple reasons. For one, the WMD notion was based on far shakier evidence, with the Bush administration claiming that Saddam Hussein was possessing nuclear weapons, even when UN investigators and the Iraq Service Group repeatedly claimed they had no evidence of such. The Uyghur situation, on the other hand, has much more evidence supporting its existence, including, but not limited to, countless eyewitness accounts, leaked government documents, and video footage. But even ignoring that, to compare the situation between the United States and Iraq in 2002 and the United States and China in 2020 is nothing short of laughable. China isn't a tiny country strangled by US sanctions. It's a world superpower which makes up for more than 13% of our global trade. The US doesn't want to go to war with China. Doing so will either result in full-on nuclear holocaust or a war so bloody and ridiculously drawn out, it wouldn't be worth it even to the most hawkish of neocons.
Documents reveal what appears to be the largest imprisonment of people on the basis of religion since the Holocaust.
And if this is the first time that you're hearing about an estimated 1 million people who've been held in detention camps, mostly Uyghurs, but also Kazakhs and other ethnic minorities, you are not alone.
All right, first point. 1 million Uyghurs are rounded up and forcibly detained in the largest detainment of religious minorities since the Holocaust. That is a pretty serious claim, but it is completely inaccurate. First, let's start off with that 1 million number. Where is it from? Apparently, it's just common knowledge now, according to some far-right Christian experts. But people over at Gray Zone did an awesome job breaking down this number using primary sources from the NGO's own report. And believe it or not, they got this million prisoner number from 8 interviewees. Yes, these researchers only interviewed 8 interviewees and estimated, based on these interviews, of a region of 11 million, over 1 million have been imprisoned. They literally multiplied and rounded up numbers from 8 interviewees and applied them to the number of villages, similar circumstances, to calculate 1 million prisoners. I highly recommend that you actually read how they did this math. It's hilarious if it didn't have real-world consequences. Not only this number comes from a report submitted, not created, to the UN by a group called Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders, an NGO funded by the United States State Department through the National Endowment of Democracy, or NED. In fact, between 2012 and 2016, they funded over $3 million to this group. So you can understand why they love that number so much. At a time, 95% of their revenue came from the State Department.
Okay, so a few things. It is true that the CHRD does receive funding from the State Department, and that their method of getting that 1 million number, interviewing 8 Uighurs from various provinces in Xinjiang and asking them how many people from their village were sent to camps, was somewhat suspect. However, it is not the only figure for 1 million we have. Take the Zen's estimate, for example. Now, many Uyghur genocide denialists will dismiss Zen's estimate because of his fundamentalist Christian beliefs. Abhorrent as his views may be, his reasoning for coming up with that statistic was fairly reasonable. The estimate was based on a leak from a Chinese official published in the Turkish newspaper Istiklal, a Uyghur exile group, and later was confirmed by Newsweek Japan in an article they wrote, link in the description. The leak claimed that 892,000 people had been detained, but the leak was missing major population centers, so Zen's rounded up to 1 million. And while the CHRD and Zen's reports are the two that Uyghur genocide denialists point to the most because they're easiest to shout biased at, which is funny because at multiple points in this video, BayArea 415 cites the CGN, a literal propaganda network for the Chinese state, but they're not the only reports which emphasize the 1 million number. The BBC, for example, had GMD, a multinational aerospace company, look at satellite images they had captured over Xinjiang. They came to the conclusion that 44 of them were detention centers. They then got together a separate team of architects, who estimated that the camps could hold anywhere from 11,000 to 130,000 individuals. If 1 million people were being held at these camps, there would only need to be 22,730 individuals in each camp, a very likely possibility given the estimated number of people these prisons can hold. In addition, the Agence French Passé, I probably butchered that, found that according to leaked Chinese government documents, specifically from the Hotan County Vocational Education Bureau, China ordered 194,000 Chinese language books for a single camp alone. But even ignoring that, whether or not specifically 1 million individuals were detained by the Chinese government is almost irrelevant, since it would be just as abhorrent if the Chinese government interned 500,000 or 250,000 people. It's kind of like when Holocaust deniers obsess over the 6 million number. I mean, if Hitler killed 3 million Jews instead of 6, it still would have been an unspeakable atrocity. And the same goes for China and the Uyghur situation.
Because it turns out Uyghurs are being shipped, and not always willingly, to work in factories across China, and some of the products they've been making may be right in front of your face.
If you are one of the millions of people around the world wearing a face mask because of the coronavirus pandemic, this footage may concern you. It shows a group of Uyghurs arriving at a textile company that started producing masks in response to the...
Alright, this next point about Uyghurs being forced to work and should be seen as slave labor. John showed these videos of Chinese media with people clapping as slaves. Instead of people going to work, looking at all these prison pictures too, they have houses with furnished furniture, modern amenities and whatnot. But now let's compare this to actual slave labor being used in, let's say, Qatar for building FIFA stadiums, where workers are not being paid, their passports are being taken away, horrible working conditions, workers dying on the premises, and living in dorm-like situation with bunk beds. Most of these allegations of forced labor have been publicized by a right-wing funded think tank in Australia called Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which has so many ties to conservative networks and weapons manufacturers. Yes, weapons manufacturers like Lockheed Martin. They've constantly promoted this narrative that they are being forced to work, when in reality, China has been pushing more job and employment opportunities for those in need. China has been promoting job and relocation programs for impoverished populations and communities since 2012 with great success, eliminating almost 99% of poverty in China. Just like Google or Apple busing people to work, these companies help transport hundreds of thousands to earn better wages, with better living conditions for their families. You can even see this in John's video. These are not prison or camps, but actual houses. I also did a segment that shows these relocation and employment programs are actually embraced by these impoverished communities, most of which are minority. The Australian reports literally cites Chinese media sources for their backup, but these very same media sources praise these programs. This is a quote from an article reporting from one of these media sources. The story about a migrant worker from Xinjiang who obtained full-time industrial employment in an urban province of Shandong, sorry if I'm mispronouncing these by the way, through the government's employment program. The woman described the challenges of working far away from her family in Xinjiang, but emphasizes that she used the program to earn more income and pay for household renovations and new livestock back home.
So first off, I'd like to note that, once again, the video he's showing is from the CTGN, a Chinese state propaganda network, but even ignoring that, while it is true that many of the reports of forced labor have come from the ASPI, which is clearly a biased organization, that A, does not necessarily mean what they are saying is incorrect, and B, they don't provide the only evidence we have. Multiple videos have been leaked revealing Uyghurs working in and being bused to forced labor camps in Xinjiang from re-education camps. And given the fact that nearly a fifth of the world's cotton exports come from Xinjiang, it's almost inevitable that many big brands will be involved in this labor. In fact, just recently, more than 180 human rights organizations signed a letter accusing several big-name companies, such as Nike, H&M, and Amazon, of using Uyghur forced labor. Geez, BayArea 415, why are you shilling for the corporate establishment and billionaire class? I thought you were supposed to be a socialist or something. And as far as his claim in relation to the notion that the Uyghurs actually support these relocation programs, the only thing he shows for that is a single testimony as proof. Gee, a single testimony from a biased source being used to prove a disingenuous point. I wonder what that reminds me of.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
As far as the issue of Qatar is concerned, well, this is whataboutism. Just because another country does slavery doesn't mean slavery in another country isn't bad. Whether it's China, Qatar, or yes, even America, slavery is a moral evil that should be condemned by any thinking person. As far as the 99% poverty elimination, this is a common notion amongst tankies and neoliberals that's wildly over-exaggerated. The Chinese government has kept their poverty line at an incredibly low level, about $1.9 a day, to make themselves look as good as possible. When that number is lifted up to $3.5 a day, for example, the number of poor people in China is 7%, and 27% for people living at $5.5 a day. For more information on this, Bad Empanada did a great video on the topic that I'll just link below.
Baseline difference there, on top of which some Han Chinese have held bigoted views about the Uyghurs.
The people from Xinjiang are not very good. Robbers and thieves.
This point about some sort of Han supremacy against Uyghurs is just flat out false. Again, it's extremely misleading to show that one video from 2008, over 10 years ago, of a woman saying derogatory things does not really hold much in showing or proving Han supremacy. I can show you plenty of videos that just happened last week of white Americans saying that they are superior of minorities. But in addition to that, there's a consistent praise of Uyghur culture happening all over in Chinese media, from celebrating their traditions to their accomplishments and successes, to even sending diplomats to tour around these regions and these vocational schools in question, which are supported by a large majority of Muslim countries all over the world. I even spoke recently about this, and here's a number of points that I find very peculiar about this Han supremacy argument. One, if there is a Han supremacy complex, shouldn't we be seeing some sort of propaganda from the Chinese government or even the people saying how Han culture is superior than the Uyghurs? We've seen the extent of this in fascistic societies and people that discriminate and whatnot, but where are these assaults happening between Han and Uyghurs? Where are the Sean Hannitys of China pointing out how Muslims are terrorists and they must be treated as such, as Han people are more civilized and these people are more savages?
Well, there's a lot to address here. First of all, on the point that Uyghur culture is supposedly celebrated within the Han mainstream, that's completely irrelevant to the point as whether or not there's ethnic tensions between the Han Chinese and the Uyghurs. It's like saying there's no systemic racism in America because hip-hop is popular. Secondly, as far as the assertion BayArea 415 makes about needing proof of ethnic tensions between the Han and Uyghurs in order for this claim to make sense, well, all I need to point out are the events which started this whole kerfuffle in the first place, that being the riots in Urumqi, which followed a case in Shaogan of mobs of Han Chinese murdering a pair of Uyghurs and wounding several others. Not to mention the fact that Islamophobic tendencies are widespread throughout China, with social media in particular being a hive for religious bigotry. So, yeah, there's that.
Amid an overall atmosphere of extreme discrimination, finally boiled over in 2009 with riots in the capital that killed 200 people, mostly Han Chinese. But rather than address the complex underlying factors behind those riots and other incidents, the Chinese government simply painted them as religious terrorism.
So there are a lot of experts that actually said these were not riots, but actual terrorist attacks done by extremists, and they were denounced by many Muslim leaders within the region.
宗教界的人士，我认为这个事情 是有阴谋的，有这么一个策划的，对我们伊斯兰教是无关的，对我们民族也是无关的这么一个大规模的一个暴恐案件。
无论用哪一个标准来衡量，那么2009年的7.5事件呢，依然是典型的大规模的恐怖袭击事件。
To expand on this more, Xinjiang has been the target of a large number of terrorist attacks by extremists that is often neglected by Western media. From 1990 through 2016, thousands of citizens were killed because of extremist attacks. But luckily, since 2017, not one person has died by a terrorist attack in this region. But instead of bombing other Muslim countries or initiating a campaign of hate or discrimination, China has simply upped their security and used vocational schools to help those susceptible to extremism find better social opportunities for success. CGTN has many of these success stories concerning this as well.
We traveled across Xinjiang in the past few days and actually found some of these attendees. 26-year-old Rukia Yakub spent 10 months in the education center. While there, she perfected her Mandarin skills and studied sales. Now she is a real estate sales agent, earning over 8,000 yuan or over $1,100 a month, way above the local average.
我觉得我现在变得更快乐了。
So, a lot of things. First of all, as far as saying that a lot of experts agreed that the violence was actually religious terrorism, who are the experts? Given the fact that you've cited Chinese state propaganda at least a dozen times, I'd be skeptical of them, to say the least. As far as the notion that these are all vocational training centers, well, generally, at least where I'm from, vocational training schools don't usually involve kidnapping people for visiting other countries, cuffing people for up to 12 hours, and waterboarding them when they don't follow protocol, separating families from their children, and forcing them to drink alcohol and eat pork, forbidden practices in Islam. Also, side note, I love how tankies are fervently opposed to the kind of war on terror policies lefties rightly grill the Bush and Obama administration in pursuing, but will immediately drop that the second China comes up and defend actions that are just as bad, if not significantly worse. I mean, at least in America, we haven't rounded up Muslim people and sent them to concentration camps. Yet.
Leaked classified documents have shown that staff at these facilities were told to prevent students from freely...
By the way, those leaked documents have some pretty interesting Chinese grammatical errors they were straight up Google translated from English. There's this awesome tweet breaking down these documents and calling out these extreme flaws here. Additionally, some of these are just speeches given regarding recent crackdowns on terrorism as a whole, not towards Muslims. The whole "show absolutely no mercy" quote from the New York Times was directed towards terrorism, not Uighurs. Again, lost in translation, but fitting for a Western agenda.
So first of all, I love how he alludes to the idea that the NYT documents are all actually fake without having the balls to come out and state it outright. But secondly, as far as it being in regards to just terrorism broadly, given the fact that most of the terror incidents in China have been committed by Uyghur Islamic extremists, it's not too much of a stretch to assume that when Chinese officials talk about terrorism, they're referring to Uyghur Muslim terrorism.
Just listen to one former detainee describe what she went through.
Each woman gets 2 minutes to go to the toilet.
Alright, let me just go on a mini rant about these quote-unquote interviewees. I first started to notice this claim when studying North Korean defectors, and how many not only embellish the truth, but outright lie. It's no surprise that many North Korean defectors inaccurately describe prison conditions, living standards, and absurd laws that they must abide by when staying in North Korea. It's been later discovered that most of these stories are pressured by the South Korean government, really doing some shady stuff to keep these narratives alive, going so far as threatening family members of these defectors. There's a great documentary that not only debunks these lies surrounding the DPRK, but also shows the immense pressures defectors are under to push these narratives from the South Korean government. Along with the fame and fortune these defectors obtain, these witnesses are truly unreliable sources. Same thing happening here. There are a bunch of sources calling out these witnesses, from families stating that none of these things ever happened, to the witnesses.
So this is a common tactic by tankies, to dismiss any criticism of their daddy states by saying that the testimony that they don't like is unreliable and unhelpful. It's true that some stories of North Korean defectors are exaggerated. in large part because of the celebrity those who escape that place experience by telling their stories. However, we have countless examples of Uyghur Muslims sharing their eyewitness experiences not on corporate-owned cable television, but on YouTube, recorded by phone or tablet, often with just a few dozen views. For just a few examples, Vadim Banana made a compilation of some of these low-quality videos on his Twitter page, which I'll link in the description. For real, though, I'd love to see this guy sit here and say all those people are CIA psyops. I really fucking would. He won't, obviously. He's a fucking coward. But I'd love to see it anyways. Oh yeah, and the only example of Uyghurs challenging the Western narratives he gives are on literal Chinese state television. That's a nice meme right there.
All while separated from her family for 2 years. And while they were eventually reunited, they are understandably still haunted to this day.
For 2 years you didn't see your mom?
Really? Separating families. You want to talk about separating families? How about those undocumented families? How about those Syrian families you don't want in your country? You know what? I want to end on this scene right here, where John attempts to mitigate both U.S. human rights violations and China's by saying they are both bad. All of this is more than just lies, hypocrisy, or manipulative propaganda. It's evil. The West, all of a sudden, has a grand concern for Muslims, despite the fact that they are purposefully ignoring Guantanamo Bay, countless innocent Muslims tortured at the hands of US soldiers, and their own domestic discrimination against Islam. They use puppets like John to say how this is a silent issue for the media. But it's all a ploy for the West to continue its racist imperialist narrative on China, when they themselves have done every single thing they allege against them times 1,000. But both sides are equally bad. Just take a look at the Latino community for actual concentration camps where scientific experiments, gassing innocent people with dangerous chemicals, sexual assault on minors from guards, and even mass graves are actually taking place. But you want me to hate on China because they have some vocational schools to stop extremism? No, I will not allow this phony both sides are bad excuse for you to criticize another country while ignoring your own issues on the very same things or worse. I will not allow a Westerner representing centuries of actual imperialism, genocide, and oppression of minorities to dictate how I should react from shallow allegations that have no substance and only biased agendas. They spilt the blood of billions, and now they're waving a mother and her child crying in front of my face to support their phony concerns of Muslims in China. They do not have any more.
So, a lot of things. First of all, John Oliver actually has made videos going after family separations at the border, ICE, etc. So, I don't even see how this argument works. But secondly, as far as the point that the US government doesn't actually care about the Uyghurs in China, I completely agree. Trump and Pompeo do not give a single rat's ass about the Uyghurs in China and are more or less just using them as pawns in their dick-measuring contest with China. However, just because they don't care about the Uyghur Muslims doesn't mean we on the left shouldn't care too. As leftists, we should have a universal standard when it comes to defending and advocating for the rights of human beings, whether it be Palestinian protesters, Kurdish freedom fighters, Latinos at the border camps, or the Uyghurs in the re-education camps. But people like you, BayArea 415, do not have that universal standard. Because you don't have any standards in the first place. You don't care about the Uyghurs, you don't care about minorities, I honestly don't even think you care about Latinos. What you care about is getting your edgy rage out at American capitalism and imperialism by gluing yourself onto states that don't give a shit about ending capitalism or imperialism, but in fact practice it themselves. I mean, throughout this segment, you've literally engaged in the exact hypocrisy that dipshit right-wingers do when they condemn Chinese human rights abuses, but are cricket silent about the secret police in Portland or the concentration camps at the border. Over the course of the last few months, I've seen so many of these tanky dipshits who care more about opposing US policies than they do in standing with a marginalized minority. And while that does genuinely infuriate me, I think what infuriates me more are the people in breadtube, coffin, who try to ignore and excuse this behavior and who attack those who do criticize this behavior in the name of some notion of left unity. And to those people, well, for them, all I have to say is no. I'm not in favor of complete sectarianism. I'm more than happy to work with and agree with people who I have disagreements with on certain issues in pursuit of a better tomorrow. Liberals, Demsocs, anarchists, etc. But not these people. Because in order to work with people, you have to have shared value. And I can't think of a single shared value I have for the kind of people who defend denying the violent crackdown and cultural genocide of a marginalized community because they don't like American foreign policy. I'm Man the Wall. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.